Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And I'm going to skip the usual prologue today because I'm just too excited and eager to talk about Miss Marvel. Now, in case you somehow avoided the news, Marvel Studios dropped the first trailer for this upcoming series. And as a fan of all things Kamala Khan, I won't mince words. It was marvelous. From the imaginative style, to Iman Vellani's appearance, to the use of blinding lights playing in the background, to that perfect shot of Kamala in her costume at the end, this trailer just did so much to welcome Miss Marvel to the MCU. On top of that, it gave us a debut date, which I've already marked on my calendar. And believe me, I don't care what's going on that day. I intend to build it entirely around watching Miss Marvel. But I'm not making this video just to gush about how much I'm looking forward to the show. Well, not entirely anyways. I'm making it to address what might be the most contentious aspect of this show, her powers. Specifically, how they differ considerably from the Miss Marvel comics. Now, I don't deny that this is a crucial detail, especially for superhero media. I understand that not every TV show or movie can fully translate every detail from the source material, especially when the source material is so vast and convoluted, as superhero comics tend to be. But when it comes to translating a superhero from comics to live action, getting their powers right is very important. Now that being said, Miss Marvel's situation is unique, and not just with respect to this upcoming show. To explain, I'll need to delve a bit into the Miss Marvel comics. And these are comics I highly recommend, by the way. Seriously, before you watch this show, check out the comics. It only took one issue for me to fall in love with Kamala Khan. Just read her first arc from 2014, No Normal. It does so much to reveal why this character became so iconic so quickly. And in that same comic, it established what her powers were. Officially, Miss Marvel is classified as a polymorph. And for those of you who aren't familiar with comic book jargon, that's just a technical way of saying she can stretch, grow, and remold her body. Think Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four. But in Kamala Khan's case, there are a few differences. And in terms of how they work, those differences are relatively minor, at least with respect to superpowered physics. According to her friend/love interest Bruno, Kamala basically shares her mass with future and concurrent versions of herself. In a sense, she time travels on a molecular level whenever she uses her powers to get the mass she needs to morph her body. Then it all returns once she snaps back into place. Through this same process, she can also alter her size and heal faster, a process she calls embiggening. She's even used it to shapeshift her appearance on a few occasions, although that ability rarely comes into play these days. However, it's the origin of these powers that are more noteworthy, because in these same comics, Kamala Khan is identified as an Inhuman. That means she inherited Inhuman genes, and as such, she got her powers like all other Inhumans, by means of Terrigenesis from the Terrigen Mists. Now, at the time of her debut in 2014, that was entirely understandable. She came along just as Marvel was making their big push to rise the profile of the Inhumans. Yes, that did come at the cost of mutants in the X-Men, but that's another story, one I've already made a video about no less. And it's true that in being an Inhuman, Kamala's story was tied to that of other Inhumans. While it never got too entwined with stories involving Black Bolt or Medusa, it was still the main catalyst for her powers. And based on what we know so far, this is where the Miss Marvel show would differ considerably. It was already heavily rumored that her powers would change in this show, and this trailer does seem to confirm that. From the looks of it, there's no hint of any Inhumans connection whatsoever. Now that may still change, but that shot of those fancy bracelets, which look a lot like the rings from Shang-Chi, hints that her powers will have a very different origin. While we don't yet know the specifics, the trailer clearly shows the results. Instead of altering her body, she's manifesting some sort of energy construct. What she does with those constructs, though, look quite similar to what she does in the comics, forming giant fists and shielding others from harm. But similar or not, this does have a few fans concerned, including other Miss Marvel fans. And I get that concern, because I agree, this is not a trivial change for Kamala Khan. Her powers are a significant part of her story. Her co-creator G. Willow Wilson has stated that she chose being a polymorph for a reason. Those kinds of powers involve so much physical and mental strain. And for a teenager already going through so many mental and physical changes to begin with, they're bound to further compound that strain. But even without knowing the specifics of these new powers, I'm honestly not too concerned. I'll even go so far as to say that Kamala's powers had to change for this show. And not just because showing her body grow would be a lot harder to shoot, effects-wise. This is Disney, after all. They have the money and the resources. Now, I may be speculating here, but I think this change had to happen because tying Kamala to the Inhumans just wouldn't work at this point. That's not to say it couldn't be done. I just think it would have been exceedingly difficult, not to mention messy and convoluted. Something the MCU can't have too much of these days, especially with the multiverse coming into play. As for why I think it wouldn't work as a narrative, there are actually multiple reasons for that. For one, the actual presence of the Inhumans in the MCU is a bit uncertain at this point. Yes, the Inhumans played a major role in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV series, which was initially tied to the MCU. But through some machinations that are too confusing to explain, the events of that show have been rendered non-canon for the most part. Neither the characters in that show nor the Inhumans have been referenced in a single MCU movie. And it's really not clear if they'll ever be referenced. But then, there was the short-lived Inhumans TV show. A show I'm sure everyone at Marvel Studios would prefer to forget. Now, let me go on record as saying I never actually watched this show. Hell, I could barely finish watching the trailer. But the fact that show was canceled after just one season should tell you all you need to know about it. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And I have a feeling the last thing Marvel Studios wants to do is associate an important new character with a failure of that magnitude. That, in my opinion, is the primary reason why this show will avoid Inhumans connections. I highly doubt anybody wants Ms. Marvel to be tainted with the baggage of that misguided disaster. Plus, and this is also an opinion of mine, I think connecting Ms. Marvel with the Inhumans would invite a whole host of other complications. You see, a big part of the Inhumans' backstory is that they're a secret society. They have traditions steeped in xenophobia and hierarchies, concepts that have become incredibly touchy in recent years. And those concepts are not at all compatible with Disney's efforts to become more open and inclusive. So, in this case, the easiest possible recourse is to just sever all ties between Ms. Marvel and the Inhumans. At least for now. Instead, we may see Ms. Marvel's powers have a more magical origin, something that wouldn't be completely out of place in the current MCU. Magic, after all, has become a lot more relevant, given the recent events of WandaVision. And since Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is set to debut a month before this show, it might make sense to tie Ms. Marvel's powers to the more mystical side of the MCU. But another possibility, which I actually think is more likely, is that Kamala's powers will be tied to the Kree. That is, after all, how Carol Danvers got her powers in her movie. And it's also well established that Carol is Kamala Khan's favorite hero, both in the comics and in this show from the looks of it. And since we already know that Ms. Marvel is showing up in the sequel, The Marvels, it makes sense to give her powers a similar origin. That might mean those bracelets she puts on are some sort of lost Kree tech. Something that alters her body, just like we saw with Carol or Monica Rambeau in WandaVision. Now, the full nature of her powers could take any number of forms, but whatever the origin, I still believe this had to happen. And I'm also confident that Marvel Studios will find a way to make it work. Why am I confident? Because they've made other major changes to characters before and succeeded. Anybody remember Thanos, the biggest threat the MCU ever faced, and now one of the most iconic villains in movie history? Some already forget that Marvel changed his origin considerably from his comic book counterpart. Because in the comics, much of Thanos' story revolves around him trying to win the love of the physical embodiment of death. That was why he wanted to wipe out half of all life in the universe, not to save it from overpopulation. By almost any measure, that's a considerable change. But Marvel Studios found a way to make it work. And fans celebrated this new iteration of the character. So I don't see why Kamala Khan should be any different. Now granted, she is facing some very unreasonable standards. She is a female superhero and a female lead on a TV show, who also happens to be Pakistani and Muslim. She is going to be criticized more heavily by assholes who will latch onto any excuse to hate her. It's not fair, and it's not right. But that's just the shitty world we live in. And I would argue that's exactly why we need a show like Ms. Marvel. Because regardless of those awful standards, I think these powers, whatever form they take, they'll work for her. Because at the end of the day, Kamala Khan's powers are secondary to what makes her so endearing. The trailer itself captured so many of those traits. She's a self-proclaimed fangirl, someone who loves superheroes and constantly daydreams about them. She's also an awkward teenage girl living in Jersey City, feeling like she doesn't fit in and that nobody understands her. But she also has a big heart, a loving family, and she doesn't hesitate to do the right thing. These are all qualities that made so many fans fall in love with Kamala Khan. I know this because I'm one of them. And the vast number of Ms. Marvel cosplayers that I see at Comic-Con every year shows that I am not alone in that sentiment. Right now, Ms. Marvel promises to be one of Marvel Studios' boldest shows to date. It's bringing to life a character whose rise to success was unique and unorthodox. But she's already done so much to win the hearts of so many fans. And now, Iman Vellani is poised to bring her to life. And I, for one, can't wait to see how it plays out. Her presence can only embiggen the MCU in all the right ways. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, take care and stay